There is no chateau here, no grand stone facade, no ornate gate, just a modest farmhouse on a flat plateau in Pomerol, one of the smallest and least known appellations in Bordeaux. And yet, this is where the most expensive Merlot on earth is made. Petrus has never been officially classified. It holds no government-sanctioned rank among the great estates of France. No decree elevated it. No committee voted it into the hierarchy. The market did that on its own. A single bottle of a good vintage sells for between $1,500 and $5,000 on release. Historic bottles reach tens of thousands at auction, and the estate itself, just 11.4 hectares of clay, has been valued at over 1 billion euros. This is the story of how a piece of ground with no castle, no classification, and no famous name became the standard against which all other Merlot is measured. The vineyard has been here since the 1750s, one of the oldest continuously worked plots in Pomerol. Its first appearance in official records comes from 1837, when the estate belonged to a family named Arnaud. The name Petrus comes from the Latin word for stone, a direct reference to the clay soil that dries to the hardness of rock in summer heat. The estate's first moment on the world stage came in 1878 at the Paris Universal Exhibition. Petrus won a gold medal for a wine from Pomerol, a region the wine world largely ignored. This was a rupture. Petrus became the first wine from the appellation to sell at prices comparable to the second growths of the Medoc. Then came phylloxera. The louse that destroyed the vineyards of Europe in the late 19th century forced every estate to make a choice. The owners of Petrus chose Merlot, a decision that, on this particular soil, would prove to be the right one. In 1917, the Arnaud family sold the estate. It passed through brief ownership before a woman arrived who would change everything. Her name was Madame Edmond Loubat, and she understood luxury before the word became a business category. She owned the finest restaurant on the right bank, l'Hôtel Loubat in Libourne. Through the 1920s, she quietly bought shares in Petrus from its owners. By 1929, she held the estate entirely. It covered roughly 7 hectares at the time. Her strategy was simple and audacious. She believed her wine was better than the first growths of the Medoc, so she priced it as if it were. The logic was precise. If a bottle costs as much as the finest wine in France, the market treats it as such. She was rarely seen without an elaborate hat. She moved through the highest levels of French society with confidence and purpose. In 1953, she traveled to England for the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II, and brought with her a case of Petrus as a personal gift to Buckingham Palace. The vintage was likely 1947 or 1949. The gesture was noted. She also commissioned a new label. At its center, St. Peter, holding the keys to paradise. A bronze statue of the same figure was installed at the estate. The message was deliberate. This wine came from sacred ground. Then came February 1956. A catastrophic frost swept through Bordeaux and destroyed most of the region's vines. At Petrus, production that year effectively ceased. Where other owners cleared their dead vines and replanted from scratch, Madame Loubat refused. She applied a technique called recépage, cutting the dead wood back to the living root, then grafting new shoots onto the original root system. The roots, deep and ancient, had survived the cold. This decision preserved something that cannot be bought or replanted, the age of the root system and its reach into the clay below. It is part of why Petrus today tastes the way it does. In 1945, Madame Loubat made the decision that would define Petrus for the next century. She gave exclusive distribution rights to a young negociant from Libourne named Jean-Pierre Moueix. He was methodical, ambitious, and already convinced that Pomerol was being ignored by the world. While neighboring estates sold their wine to Belgium and not much further, Mouek began building a global distribution network. In the 1960s, he focused on New York. Through the restaurant Le Pavillon, the most influential French dining room in America at the time, Petrus reached a new audience. Among them was the Kennedy family. Their visible enthusiasm for the wine transformed it overnight into a marker of status among American financial and political circles. When Madame Loubat died in 1961, she left no children. The estate passed in equal shares to her niece, Lily Lacoste Loubat, and her nephew, a Monsieur Lignac. By 1969, through a series of purchases, the Mouet family had acquired full ownership. That same year, they expanded the estate. They purchased approximately 4.5 hectares from the neighboring Chateau. The land sat on the same clay deposit as the original Petrus vineyard. The acquisition brought the total to 11.4 hectares, without diluting a single quality metric. Christian Moueix, who took over technical direction in 1970, introduced green harvesting to Bordeaux, deliberately cutting away unripe grape clusters mid-season to concentrate the energy of the vine into fewer, better fruit. He used it to full effect in 1982, the vintage that introduced Petrus to a generation of critics, including Robert Parker, who helped define the modern era of wine collecting. In 2018, a 20% stake in the estate was acquired by Alejandro Santo Domingo, a Colombian-American billionaire and philanthropist. The Mouet family stated publicly that the goal was long-term financial stability and the capacity to invest in other European vineyards. The financial terms of the deal were never disclosed. Analysts estimated the full estate's value at over 1 billion euros. The family close to the deal disputed that figure. What is not disputed? Petrus remains one of the most carefully managed estates in the world. 2 families, 1 piece of land, no compromises. To understand Petrus, you have to go underground. Most of the Pomerol plateau sits on sandy clay over gravel, soil that drains well and suits Merlot reasonably. But in the eastern part of the plateau, there is an anomaly. A small dome of land, roughly 20 hectares, rises to 40 meters above sea level, the highest point in the entire appellation. Geologists call it a boutonnière, a buttonhole in the earth. All 11.4 hectares of Petrus sit entirely on this dome. No other estate in the world has full coverage of this soil type. Neighboring Chateau, l'Évangile, La Conseillante, Gazin have portions of it. Petrus has all of it. Below the surface, the soil splits into 2 layers. The upper 60 to 80 centimeters is dark clay mixed with sand, rich in organic matter. Below that lies a dense blue-gray clay of a specific mineral type called smectite. This clay is 40 million years old. The gravel plains surrounding it are 1 million years old. Petrus sits on something 40 times more ancient than its neighbors. Smectite clay is what makes this vineyard different from everything else on earth. In autumn and winter, the clay absorbs water into its molecular structure. It swells and becomes impermeable. The vine's roots cannot penetrate it. They spread horizontally instead, confined to the upper 80 centimeters of soil. Then summer arrives. The upper layer dries and hardens to stone, as the name suggests. In any other vineyard, the vine would struggle. Here, the smectite clay begins releasing its stored water back through capillary action, slowly, precisely, milliliter by milliliter. The vine receives just enough water to stay alive and ripen, never enough to dilute the fruit. This controlled stress produces thick skins, deep color, and a tannin structure that allows Petrus to age for half a century. The blue color of the clay comes from high concentrations of iron in a reduced state. Local growers call this layer crasse de fer, iron slag. It is responsible for Petrus's signature aromatic notes: damp earth, fresh truffle, graphite, violet. These notes cannot be manufactured. They come directly from the mineral composition of the ground. Vines are planted at densities between 6,600 and 10,000 per hectare, forcing competition for resources and limiting yield. Average production is around 25,000 to 30,000 bottles per year. In difficult years, yields fall further. In catastrophic years, no wine is released at all. It has happened 3 times: 1956, 1965, and 1991. Since the 2011 vintage, Petrus has been made entirely from Merlot. The last Cabernet Franc vines were removed after the 2010 harvest. The decision reflected a philosophy the Moïse family call Burgundian purity: one grape, one terroir, no compromise. Harvest is done entirely by hand, in a single operation lasting 2 to 6 days. Workers are not permitted to pick in the morning. They begin only in the afternoon, after the dew has fully evaporated, to avoid diluting the juice with even microscopic amounts of surface water. There is a story, unconfirmed but widely repeated, that during the wet harvest of 1987, the estate hired helicopters to hover over the vineyard at low altitude, using rotor wash to dry the grapes before picking. Petrus has never officially confirmed it. It remains one of the more vivid illustrations of what this estate considers acceptable lengths to go to. In the cellar, fermentation happens in concrete tanks, chosen for their thermal stability and slight porosity, which allows a small exchange of oxygen without imparting any flavor. Wild yeasts only. Aging lasts 18 to 22 months in French oak barrels, approximately 50% new. No filtration before bottling, no second wine. Any barrel that does not meet the standard is sold anonymously as generic Pomerol. 5 vintages, 5 different conversations between the vine and the clay. 1947. The summer was punishing. Sugars accumulated so fast that fermentation became unstable. What came out of that chaos was dense, almost viscous. Dried flowers, mint, truffle, and a texture closer to syrup than wine. It is not tasted so much as experienced. 1961. Drought cut the yield to almost nothing. What remained concentrated in the surviving fruit with unusual intensity: cedar, dark cherry, smoked earth, bitter chocolate. It unfolds slowly, like a long scene in a film. The Pomerol clay speaks most clearly in this vintage. 1982, a warm, generous summer. The blue clay released everything it had: cassis, dark plum, coffee, earth, a wine of pure opulence. This was the vintage that changed how the world thought about Bordeaux and about Petrus specifically. Robert Parker's assessment made it a benchmark. 1998. Most of Bordeaux suffered from autumn rain. Pomerol held its warmth through September. The result was a wine of unexpected youth: damp earth, dark olive, black fruit, with an acidity that holds the whole structure in place. It remains almost silent when young. Patient collectors are still waiting. 2000, a vintage the market decided was symbolic before the grapes were even picked. Crème de cassis, forest floor, truffle, violet, all wrapped in the velvet texture that only old clay can produce. No sharp edges, a finish with no clear end point. The drinking window for Petrus typically opens 15 years after harvest and can extend to 50. This is not a wine to open young. Petrus was never supposed to be what it became. It had no castle, no official rank, no centuries of royal patronage. It came from the least regarded corner of the least classified appellation in Bordeaux, and it built its reputation entirely on what it put in the bottle. A woman with an elaborate hat understood this before anyone else did. A family of negociants understood how to carry it to the world. And beneath all of it, 40 meters above the Pomerol plain, inside 40-million-year-old clay, a vine keeps doing what it has always done, drinking water, storing it, releasing it, slowly, on its own terms. That is what Petrus tastes like, not power, not opulence, though it has both. It tastes like patience, like something that has been waiting a very long time and is in no hurry to finish. If you enjoyed this story and want to support the show, there are two simple ways to do it. First, you can stream my music under the name Airwalls on Spotify or any other streaming service. And second, you can buy me a coffee using the link in the description. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.